在国家统计局刚刚公布的经济数据中，宏观经济形势仍然是大家关注的焦点。
沪深股市今天没有继续走出反弹行情，很多投资者都在实体。
国际油价开始回落，但
地产报告显示，很多地产企业的资金链已经相当。
在珠三角地区，其中一部分中小企业正在想办法解决他们遇到的困难。在今年的 CCTV 经济年度人物评选当中，中国创造仍然是最重要的主题。
大家好，欢迎收看今天的经济半小时，我是魏成刚。今年呢是我第11次连续参加达沃斯世界经济论坛的年会。如果要说起这11年间对达沃斯最深的一个感受，那就是中国所受到的各方的关注越来越多，越来越强烈，特别是最近2年。今年达沃斯论坛的主席和创始人施瓦布教授在论坛正式开始之前，接受了他本届年会的第1次的独家专访。他向我阐述了本届达沃斯论坛的议题。他告诉我，在这样一个聚集了全球政商领袖的盛会上，达沃斯的核心议题当然是中国和其他一些新兴市场国家的崛起，因为新兴市场国家创造出了一个全新的国际经济的格局和经济的秩序，这就要求原有秩序的参与者们调整思维模式来适应这种新的形势的变化。那么在中国的崛起被不断的提及和瞩目的今天，世界对中国到底有着怎样的判断？中国又应该怎样被世界所正确的认知呢？在今年的达沃斯，我们中央电视台财经频道进行了一个大范围的调查，并设立了世界经济舞台上的中国形象专场的讨论，就是希望通过我们财经频道的努力，让世界更准确地看到一些中国经济的现实，同时呢，也让中国了解自己在世界经济舞台上的形象，从而更好地定位中国经济在世界舞台上的角色。
2011年2月14日，中国以58,786亿美元的 GDP 超越日本，成为世界第2大经济体。美国《华尔街日报》用一个时代的结束作为文章标题来形容这一历史性时刻，说这次新排名标志着作为全球增长引擎的中国和日本分别开始的崛起和衰落。事实上，来自中国国内的一系列数据正在验证着《华尔街日报》的说法。2010年年底，中国国内生产总值位居世界第2，国家外汇储备世界第1，外商直接投资世界第1。这是一连串看起来让人心动不已的数字。但是事实的另一面是，就人均 GDP 来说，中国还差日本将近10倍。那么到底应该如何冷静客观对待中国经济的地位与现状，让世界了解一个真实的中国，还原世界经济舞台一个真实中国形象呢？2011年年初，财经频道再赴达沃斯，对话全球60位政商领袖。在对话中，我们找到了这样的答案。
If I ask you to give me a score, if the scale is between 1 to 10, 10 means absolutely positive, how would you rate China?
Oh, I would say 9 without any doubt. I would hesitate between 9 and 10, but let's say at 9 to be more credible.
Oh, I would give China a very high mark. No one gets 10 out of 10, but I think China, 8 out of 10. 8's a lucky number.
If you are required to mark the Chinese economic performance of last year, if 10% is the grade is 4 marks, means excellent, and 0 means negative, what is your personal mark in your mind?
So I give China the mark of excellent, because they are always growing faster than the rest of the world.
So I think China gets, as I say, 8 or 9.
I will give it a 9 because I don't want to practice grade inflation.
在对这60位政商界领袖的访问调查中，有19位给中国形象的分数介于9至10分之间，这个比例占到 31.6%。有 56.7% 的人，也就是34人评价为8至9分之间，有6人的评分在6至7分之间，这个比例占到总数的 10%。他们对于中国形象给予了积极的总体评论。这其中得益于2008年全球金融危机爆发后，中国所采取的保八的经济增长目标和相关的经济政策，对中国和世界经济的复苏增加了信心。中国所表现出来的负责任的形象令世界瞩目。
I think that what China has done very well is the response to the crisis. I mean, China has literally stepped up in a speed and with a precision and with a power that literally helped pull the economy out of the slump that we all went into. If it hadn't been for the pull of China, this would have been much worse off. That is clear, I think, to every businessman and also to most of the politicians that have looked into China.
One of the subject matters we're exploring here in Davos is the image of China on the international stage. So if I may ask you to give me an answer, the scale is from 1 to 10, and how would you evaluate China's image? 10 means absolutely positive, 0 means negative.
My own point of view is that it would probably be around 7 or 8. I know that whenever there is a country as big as China emerging with more power, the natural feeling for a lot of people is maybe there's fear, maybe there's a threat. But I've always said that China is providing an incredible engine of growth for a lot of countries, especially in Southeast Asia and also Thailand. I think we wouldn't have enjoyed the rate of growth that we did before the crisis if China hadn't grown as fast. We certainly wouldn't have been able to recover so quickly if China hadn't provided a great market for our goods.
经历了金融危机后，中国经济在全球率先企稳回升，之后持续深入地参与到全球经济中来。2009年和2010年，以希腊和爱尔兰为代表的欧洲债务危机爆发，全球经济再度陷入全面衰退的边缘。2011年1月，中国跟欧盟3国签订了200多亿美元的合同。英国《金融时报》认为，中国重返遭遇欧元危机重创的欧洲金融市场，是对欧元区经济投了信任票，势必提升国际金融界对欧元区的信心，对欧洲摆脱危机意义极大。之后，中国国家主席胡锦涛访问美国，签署了450亿美元的美国对华出口协议，直接给美国带来23.5万个就业岗位，为备受失业率高企的美国解了燃眉之急。无论是对发达国家的经济复苏，还是对欧洲摆脱债务危机的努力，中国都展现了一个负责任的大国风范。这一点在本次世界经济论坛中得到共识。
I would also add that China has shown already quite considerable global responsibility in assuming the role of an engine, economic engine. China has acted as a very responsible financial investor in the world. So I think the Chinese population should be proud of what has been achieved.
No, I think it was re-enhanced by the results of the Chinese economy, the growth, the attitude. Without any doubt, 2010 has been a great year for China, reinforcing the image of China in the world. Steady policy, foreseeable policy, very firm support to the economy and to the development. And frankly, each time there was any worry that it would get overheated, Chinese authority intervened softly without derailing, I would say, what was taking place. I think the check and balance that's taking place in China was very impressive in 2010.
但是随之而来的也是中国经济威胁论这样的说法。欧洲智库欧洲政治经济研究中心的文章也指出，中国承诺收购深陷债务危机的欧元债券引人关注，并非表明中国是欧元的救星。中国这样做是因为他考虑到欧洲是中国的主要出口目的地，中国的承诺象征意义大于实际意义。那么为什么中国的一举一动都那么轻易地陷入舆论争议的漩涡呢？
最近去纽约的人会注意到，一抹亮丽的中国红在高楼林立的美国纽约时报广场的电子屏上格外的显眼。6块电子显示屏同时播放着一段60秒的宣传短片。显示屏的侧面还有着感受中国的英文字样，中国各行各业的代表人物也是不断的吸引着路人驻足观看。一名来自纽约的高中生在接受采访时说，他在纽约生活了18年，还是第一次看到时报广场的大屏幕上播出这么多中国人的画面，而且呢，每一个人都面带笑容，看上去每一个人都非常的幸福。 我想我们置身中国经济当中呢，我们都知道中国经济发展不均衡的现实。中国其实还有很多人生活在贫穷的农村，没有完全享受到中国经济高速发展带来的实惠。那名美国高中生对中国呢，可能也存在着某种程度的误会和误解。实际上这是一个普遍的问题，他们对中国的印象里呢，除了强大之外，实际上还存在着很多的敬畏。中国经济的威胁论不只来自国家层面，也在民间流行。那么究竟为什么会造成这些错觉呢？这些误解和错觉究竟都有哪些？为什么会出现？我们一起来听一听我在瑞士达沃斯在世界经济论坛的年会上和这些政商界的领袖以及知名经济学家的对话，听听他们怎么说。
If I ask you to give China a score, if the scale is from 1 to 10, 10 means absolutely positive image, 0 means absolutely negative image on the world stage, what might be your answer? Maybe 3 different answers in the eyes of the ordinary people in Europe and in the United States, in the eyes of opinion leaders or in the eyes of corporate leaders.
Yeah, of course. It's very difficult to give an average because it depends on who you're asking the question to and where. But overall, I would say very positive image, dynamism, moving forward, but some sort of sense of, threat, reluctance at this growing power, whether it's north or south, and of course more reluctance in the part of public opinion where people feel they are competing with China on sort of wages. That's the big question, which is why explaining to the world that China is not the world factory, but more the world assembly line.
So the score, if I ask you to come up with a score, would be somewhere around 6 or 7?
Yeah, that would be my guess, around 6 or 7.
So I will go along with it. I would say last year was a 6. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad. But there were a lot of moving parts. So I think that some of the moving parts China handled extraordinarily well. Others could be much better.
But if you give China its mark as a 6, what if you just give a mark for the United States?
I would say no more than a 4.
Grassroots, you get a whole mixture, and of course there's often great fear. I think you go to almost any country, there are fears about other countries and what their intent is, etc. So I think you do get that. If you go around the United States, you get a little bit of the trade. It's unfair. They're taking jobs. They're very aggressive. I understand that. That's almost around the world, and I'm sure it's the same thing about America and China. Goodwill.
How should we interpret that fear or see that fear? Was that fear merely a repetition of the fear towards the Japanese or against the Japanese in the 1980s in New York City, something like that?
I think that would be a good, probably an accurate way of looking at it, that we've had this fear before about related to trade and foreign countries. And like I said, I would hate to say it's America to China. I think it's, if you go around the world, they're going to say the same thing about America. Where it's intense, it doesn't trade fairly. So I think you have to have a very balanced approach. And I think China has been doing a good job trying to respond to it in an intelligent way. Not kowtow to it, but try to respond, where there are thoughtful complaints or not, to do something about it. Your president, who was just in America and did a terrific job trying to allay some of those fears and acknowledge some of the issues that China has to deal with and that America and China have to deal with together.
2010年，我国 GDP 超过日本，一跃成为世界第2大经济体，这是一次历史性的超越。而在这之前的2008年，中国成功举办了奥运会。去年上海世博会的盛大召开，令外界对中国大国形象更加瞩目。但是与此同时，世界上各种各样的声音都在出现，比如担心中国崛起可能造成的威胁，以及要求中国担负超越中国经济发展现状的责任。英国《金融时报》首席经济评论员马丁·沃尔夫对欧洲不同阶层的民众心理做了详细分析。
One exception, I think at the grassroots level in the West, there's much more worry that that Chinese success is taking away jobs. There's no doubt in the developed world, if you talk to people who are relatively uneducated, they are concerned about the jobs impact. At the elite level, that's not the big issue. They're more concerned about power, about the way China will use its power, about its big macroeconomic impact. So it differs. But I would say that on balance, the view of China is not negative, not powerfully negative, but there are things about China, there's no doubt about it, that people worry about. But then there are things about the United States people worry about. I would say anti-Chinese sentiment in Europe is probably less than anti-American sentiment in Europe. We have to remember, people resent great powers. It's just part of the natural course of events.
Its neighbors, particularly Asian neighbors, nervous?
We're not nervous. We think there are opportunities, and if what China is doing in terms of engaging our region is going to get all the other people to want to be more engaged with us, that's fine. Well, the challenge is this: China is still needs the development process to go ahead. More than any other country, you need to create I don't know how many jobs to keep the opportunities for your people.
还是回到中国经济本身，在世界范围内，中国人均 GDP 也只排在90名左右。这样来看，中国依然属于比较贫穷的发展中国家。但是在外界谈及中国应该肩负的国际责任时，往往会忽略中国社会目前的复杂状况，忽略原本很低的人均 GDP， 而只是把中国看作一个庞大的经济力量。
Do you think it's also a communication issue if China deliberately shows more of its less developed parts of the world rather than the Olympics, the Shanghai World Expo, the central business district of Beijing where your dear brother lives, or the Shanghai banking area? If we show more of images of China's countryside and the domestic challenges being more highlighted in a global stage, it will help people from around the world, readers of Financial Times, better manage their expectations.
The reality, of course, as you know much better than I do, is China is many worlds. There are bits of China which are still incredibly undeveloped, and there are bits of China which are completely and utterly first world. And of course, the Westerners visit the latter part. They're the people they do business with, are in the first world China, the people they meet, talk English with. They are in first world China. Those are where the exports come from. So inevitably, most Westerners, even well-informed Westerners who visit China from time to time, are simply not aware of how the 700 million or however many people in the rural areas live. They are not aware, therefore, of the political pressures on the country. I think I've written about this in another context. One of the big problems China faces is that it is simultaneously, because of its size, a very great power, and in many ways a developing country with huge problems.
I think you hit the nail on the head here. I think one of the things that people often don't understand about China from outside is that at one level China is the second largest economy in the world and increasingly powerful. At another level, for a large number of people in China, it's a relatively poor place on a per capita basis. And that's a very difficult contradiction to both manage for China's policymakers, because the two things can pull you in different directions. But it's also something I think people lose sight of outside of China, that for many people in China, life is still pretty tough. Things have improved enormously. A lot of people have been lifted out of poverty, an extraordinary number. I think it's China's achievement China should be most proud of. But still, there is a lot to be done. And when I look at what is laid out in the 12th five-year plan, a lot of it is about lifting those who are still trapped in poverty to a much better way of life.
在本届2011年达沃斯世界经济论坛的年会上，我还看到了不少印度的国家形象广告。这和中国在纽约的广场上展示中国形象的出发点应该基本一致，就是新兴市场国家希望与外界有更多的沟通，有更多增进了解的机会。其实呢，在让更多人了解理解中国的同时，我们也应该更加多方位的去倾听外界对中国的认知与期盼。 那么，参与达沃斯世界经济论坛年会的嘉宾们，对于未来的中国形象还有哪些期待呢
？Which might be some of the areas that you think China have excelled in recent years in order to have its image improved, and what might be some of the areas that you think China should do more to help people relax or not to be that nervous? Or
well, I think this is one of the issues: is that a lot of people outside China admire what China has achieved, but are also a bit nervous about it and a bit anxious about what the implications are of China's new strength and power in the global scene and the global economy.
We haven't seen that much. It's probably more the communication of how does China really operate, right? It's 1.3 billion people. We always hear about the Great Belt, where a lot of people are growing up, becoming rich, becoming middle class, growth of the economy. But there's this other side, the western side of China, which very few people understand, and where very few people even have an imagination how the challenges are still there, right? So I think that part is not well understood. And then the social tension to manage something that on the one hand has this gigantic economic growth, and on the other hand has so many more things to do, right? That is not yet communicated, I think.
毫无疑问，关于中国呈现给世界什么样的印象，以及在世界，尤其是西方对中国怀有的印象方面，有着巨大的文化差异。中国与世界融合碰撞的过程中，可能遭到误解，可能被质疑，可能有曲折。这其中，中国要呈现给世界什么样的印象，以及世界到底又如何认识中国？这是一个长期博弈的过程。
And you think we should just ignore all these sentiments calling China arrogant and assertive?
Yeah, I mean, these kind of statements do not lead anywhere. What's important is what is behind it. What's behind it? If behind it there are some arguments which are objectives, which needs to be listened to and adjust in consequence, then it's constructive.
站在全球以及历史发展的角度，我们也许有必要去反思中国到底呈现给了世界一个什么样的国际形象。幸好今天的中国在开放的进程中，已经开始以更多元的视角审视自己的国家的发展，走自己既定的发展道路。这条道路是属于中国的，属于一个和西方完全不同，但是都符合发展规律的经济路线。经济增长方式也日趋合理，绿色、低碳、节能减排等发展方式贯穿于中国未来的经济增长之路，也令全世界对未来的中国形象充满期待。
And of course, the discussions are there about polluting energy provision in China, about coal, energy centrals, and those kind of things. But at the same moment, China, at this very moment, is investing in big windmill parks, in solar energy, etc. So you see a dual strategy at this moment in China, and that will further develop over time. You will see that China is also embracing sustainability, sustainable technologies and those kind of things. That is also not only doing good for the world, showing responsibility, but also it is needed for China to embrace those new technologies.
Which is, what is the future of, it's a very interesting question, what is the future of Chinese business going to be in the world? Are we going to see very large, dynamic Chinese companies? We're beginning to see this. Geely's purchase of Volvo was a sort of seminal event. It was extraordinary. Are we going to see much more of that? That's a very interesting question for outside observers.
And what might be some of the areas that China has done very well in, and what might be some of the areas that you think China should improve in to communicate a better image?
I think the growth which the Chinese economy has shown over several decades is extremely impressive. And whilst many countries worldwide would love to have economic growth consistently at or above 10% per year, I don't think they understand how extraordinarily hard it is to achieve that growth. Because when you're growing that quickly, there are lots of stresses and pressures and strains which emerge across the economy. We've talked a lot about the pressure on real estate, our sector. But the need to develop the infrastructure, the economic system, for companies to build and grow in a measured and
coherent way with that speed of economic growth is a really big challenge. So I think the government has indicated that they would like the consumer sector to grow from maybe 30% currently of GDP up to 50%, which is a more normal level for a developed economy. I think that there's a need for attention to social welfare, for example, the healthcare and maybe pensions area. As the country gets richer, those will become more important to pay attention to in order that the population is comfortable, the government is paying due attention to that. And then the whole financial system will develop further and faster, and we can see that happening. The convertibility of the renminbi was obviously a
今天我们讨论的主题是世界经济舞台上的中国形象。我们中国人置身于中国经济的当中，我们自己的感受呢，当然是更深刻、更准确的。但是我们眼中的中国经济的形象和世界眼中的中国经济形象未必一致。中国人自己，我们用幸运这个词来形容我们生活的这个时代。这个时代呢，可以说是我们中国人自己用进取和努力换来的。但是回首30年来，从上个世纪80年代开始，中国经历了从封闭到改革开放的过程，这中间充满了很多的曲折和不确定性。经济的快速发展造就了这样一个不能回避的现实：区域经济发展不均衡，贫富的差距在拉大。繁华的中国都市的不远处，总有贫穷落后的乡村，构成我们视觉和心理的落差。这就是中国的现实。但是我们也处在一个经济的全球化时代，全球化的进程加速了中国和世界的融合，全球经济形势的不明朗，发达国家复苏的缓慢和新兴市场经济体的崛起，让世界迫切的需要了解一个真实的中国经济。那么到底应该如何站在世界经济的高度上为中国经济的形象定位呢？我想这取决于2个方面，一个是中国已经向世界展示了什么样的形象，以及下一步我们应该展示什么样的形象。还是那句话，世界眼中的中国经济和我们中国人自己眼中的中国经济未必完全一致。但是呢，如果我们能够帮助世界正确的去理解、正确的去描述一个真实的中国经济形象，我想这会有助于明确中国在全球经济体当中所扮演的角色和所应该承担的责任。同时呢，我们还应该想到，不仅仅要让各国的政商领袖和精英们了解中国，更要让最普通的各国人士也和这些领袖们分享他们眼中中国形象的全光谱、全内容。也许只有这样，世界才能呈现出一幅更加清晰、更加接近真实的中国经济版图。好，今天的节目就是这些，我是魏成刚，感谢收看，接下来请继续关注财经频道的其他节目。